The first thing I noticed wasn't the lights. It was the singing. Low, muffled, the kind of off-key warbling you hear from someone who thinks the shower steam is their private recording studio. But it wasn't my voice, and it sure as hell wasn't my son Tyler's. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Expensive perfume with a sweetness so heavy it felt like walking into a florist's shop at closing time. Only one person in this neighborhood marinated herself in that scent. Veronica Whitfield, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of community standards. Woman who once fined me for restaining my deck in the wrong shade of walnut. And she was in my house. I froze in the foyer, my suitcase tilting to one side. Outside, the October air still clung to my coat, but in here it was warm, too warm, and the hum of the heater mingled with faint music and running water upstairs. The ceiling above my head vibrated with footsteps. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't even supposed to be here. My flight from Zurich had landed 10 hours earlier than planned. I'd driven straight from the airport, already picturing the kind of sleep that comes after 18 hours in the air. Instead, I stood there like a man who'd walked into the wrong house. Only this one had my family photos on the wall. I stepped forward, my shoes whispering against the hardwood. Something glittered on the hall console. A pair of keys with a BMW fob. Her BMW. The knot in my stomach tightened. The house I'd inherited from Aunt Dolores 6 months ago had always felt like a sanctuary. Stained glass in the front door that cast warm colors across the foyer every afternoon. That creak in the third stair you could hear halfway across the house. The kind of place where you could breathe. But the air felt different now. Stolen. I eased my suitcase against the wall and pulled my phone from my pocket. Years in cybersecurity had drilled in me a rule I'd never broken. Document first, act second. My camera clicked softly as I filmed the hall, the coat rack, the shoes by the bench. None of them mine. From somewhere above, the shower stopped. I didn't call out. Not yet. Instead, I walked deeper into the house, past the living room. My Persian rug, the one I'd shipped from New York, was littered with takeout containers. On the coffee table sat an empty bottle of Chateau Margaux I'd been saving for my 50th birthday. Upstairs, a door creaked. The silence after the water shut off was thicker than any noise. Footsteps moved across the bedroom floor. My bedroom floor. And then a shadow broke the thin light spilling into the hall. She appeared in my doorway like the villain in the third act of Thriller. Wrapped in my bathrobe, hair damp, eyes wide for a fraction of a second before she rearranged her face into something resembling confidence. "Marcus," she said, pulling the robe tighter. "You're early." My voice was low, steady, the way it got when my patience was hanging by a thread. "It's my house, Veronica. I can come back whenever I want." She stepped forward, bare feet silent on the wood, that cloying perfume leading the way. There was a break-in scare. I was protecting the property. I didn't answer right away. I just lifted my phone, the red recording light glowing between us. Her jaw tightened. "This is unnecessary." "What's unnecessary," I said, "is you living in my home, drinking my wine, and I let my eyes drop to the robe, helping yourself to my personal things." For a second, she almost looked nervous. Then, like every good manipulator, she found her footing. "I have full emergency authority over unoccupied properties. It's in the bylaws." That made me smile, not because I believed her, but because the game had just changed. I caught hackers, corporate embezzlers, even one offshore scam ring that thought they were untraceable. And standing in my bedroom with Veronica Whitfield wrapped in my bathrobe, I knew this was no one-time trespass. This was a siege. I didn't yell. I didn't even tell her to get out. Not yet. Yelling gives people something to push back against. Silence? That makes them fill it with their own guilt. Or lies. Usually both. "Show me," I said, keeping my voice level. "The bylaw that says you can live here." She tilted her head, that real estate smile flickering across her lips. "I'll bring the paperwork tomorrow. I'm not prepared tonight." "Funny," I said, scanning the room. "You seemed plenty prepared to move in." On the nightstand, her reading glasses. On my dresser, a small jewelry box that definitely didn't belong to my late Aunt Dolores. Even the scent in the air felt wrong. Not just her perfume, but an absence of my own life. My cologne bottle was still there, but the cap was twisted the wrong way, like someone had used it and forgotten how I leave things. A floorboard creaked in the hall. I stepped toward the doorway, and a voice called out, "Casual mail? Everything all right in there?" I knew that voice. Dave Kowalski, Lukalkop, married father of 3, little league coach. He stepped into view in full uniform, though it was late and he was clearly off duty. His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't smile. "Marcus," he said evenly, "Veronica told me you might come back early. She was worried about a break-in." I took a slow breath. "And you're here because—" He gestured vaguely, "Just making sure things are under control." "By things," I said, "you mean my house?" His jaw tightened. "You're coming in hot, man. Maybe let's step outside, cool down." "No." I stepped forward, the edge of my voice deliberate. "We'll have this conversation here, where my security cameras can see it." For a second, something flickered in his expression. Not guilt, but the awareness of someone who's just realized the rules are different now. Veronica cut in before the silence could swallow us. "Marcus, no one's trying to upset you. We've been keeping an eye on the place." You've been living in the place," I interrupted. "There's a difference." Her hands tightened on the robe. Dave shifted his weight, his hand resting lightly on his duty belt. A casual posture that wasn't casual at all. That was my cue to step back, because fights you can't win in the moment are best won later with better weapons. I didn't have to push them out tonight. What I needed was proof, clean, undeniable proof that would hold up in front of someone who could make it count. I picked up my suitcase from the hall. "You both should leave," I said quietly. "Now." Dave looked at her. She looked at him. Then, without another word, they walked out, their shadows stretching long across my driveway under the porch light. The door clicked shut. My hand stayed on the lock for a beat longer than necessary. I could feel the tremor under my skin. Not fear, not even anger. Something colder. It took me less than an hour to find the first layer. The wine bottles in the recycling bin, 3 of them from my cellar. The guest towels in the dryer, damp and smelling of chlorine. An unfamiliar silk blouse draped over the arm of my sofa. And in the kitchen trash, a takeout receipt from 3 nights ago, signed V. Whitfield with my address written in the delivery field. The proof wasn't going to be hard to find. The problem was, I already suspected it would go far deeper than empty wine bottles. I unlocked my office. Nothing looked disturbed at first, until I saw the faint smear of fingerprints on the glass of my monitor. My desk drawers were slightly out of alignment, and when I checked the logs on my router, there it was, a new device connected 12 days ago. The MAC address wasn't mine. My breath came slow and steady as I exported the connection logs, every second stamped and stored. I copied the files twice, one local, one to an encrypted cloud server. When I finally sat down on the edge of my bed, the house felt different. Not just violated, observed. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh from the old heating system sounded like someone still moving through the rooms. I called my locksmith friend, told him I wanted every lock replaced by sunrise. No questions, no delays. Then I texted Beth. "Need to talk tomorrow. Privately." She replied instantly. Knew something was off. "Come by in the morning." When I set my phone on a nightstand, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Same tired eyes from the airport, same week-old stubble, but a different posture. Shoulders forward, jaw tight. I'd walked into my house expecting sleep. Instead, I'd stepped into the opening chapter of fight that was going to test every skill I had. And the part that kept me awake wasn't what they'd already done. It was what they might be planning next. Beth's kitchen smelled like cinnamon coffee and quiet judgment. She sat across from me in her worn armchair, cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows, eyes sharp in a way I'd learned meant she'd already guessed half my story before I spoke. When I told her what happened the night before, Veronica in my robe, Kowalski in my hallway, she didn't interrupt. Not once. When I was done, she leaned back, her hands curling around her mug. "She's done it before," Beth said simply. "Not with you, but you're not her first." That landed like a stone in the gut. I'd walked in thinking I'd been unlucky, targeted for being the newcomer with the fancy house. But the way Beth said it, like she was talking about a weather pattern that came around every season, told me this wasn't about bad luck. It was about a system. "She watches," Beth continued. "When someone's gone, vacation, hospital stay, long work trips. She moves in, says she's protecting the property. And people, they let it go. Easier than fighting her. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? I asked. Beth's smile was thin. Most of them were older, or alone, or they didn't want the trouble. She makes it messy, spreads rumors, calls in favors from her cop friends. By the time anyone tries to push back, they're buried in citations and complaints. The cinnamon coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I thought of my aunt's journals, the way she'd written about everyone's comings and goings. She'd never liked Veronica, said she was the kind of woman who measures worth in what she can take from others. I went home with Beth's words rattling in my head. The locksmith had finished an hour earlier, every lock gleaming with new metal. I should have felt safe. Instead, the silence was heavier. I decided to do what I do best, dig. It started with my router logs. I traced the unfamiliar device from last night to its make and model, a late-generation smartphone registered under a service plan linked to Whitfield Realty Group. Sloppy, overconfident, but that wasn't the twist. The twist came when I opened my home security backups. I'd installed cameras myself, and even when they're disabled, the backups still capture ghost frames, a few seconds of corrupted video here and there. Most were useless, but one file from a week earlier had enough data to rebuild a partial image. It showed Veronica in my dining room, walking beside a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, carrying a leather portfolio. They weren't inspecting my house like caretakers. They were touring it. I froze the frame, zoomed in on his hand. The portfolio had a real estate logo, Elite Estates Management. I ran a quick search. Luxury property broker. Operates in 3 counties. That's when the picture shifted in my head. This wasn't about someone squatting for personal comfort. This was business. She was using my home as inventory. The next file sealed it. A clip from my office. Veronica wasn't just snooping. She was photographing my property documents. The angles told me she wasn't curious. She was preparing something. The thought hit me so hard, I actually said it aloud in the empty room. She's trying to sell my house. I sat there for a long minute, staring at the frozen image on my screen. The guy with the portfolio, smiling like he'd just found his next big commission. Veronica's posture, casual but calculated, like she'd walked this routine before. The shift inside me wasn't anger this time. It was clarity. She hadn't picked me because I annoyed her. She'd picked me because I fit a profile. Owner of a high-value home, recently moved in, away often, no spouse on site, no history with the HOA politics. It was a blueprint, and I just found the front page. I backed up every file twice, then texted Beth again. Need a name for a property lawyer. Good one. Her reply came in under a minute. Sarah Morgan. You like her? She doesn't scare easy. By that night, I'd booked an appointment. I also did something I hadn't done since moving in. Slid Aunt Dolores's old leather journal from the top shelf of my closet and flipped it open. On the 3rd page from the end, in her tidy script, she'd written, "When they think they own the place, they've already lost the only thing that matters, the truth." I read it twice, then closed the book. For the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. Not because the fight ahead would be easy, but because I finally knew what kind of war I was in. And I was going to win it the way I'd won every impossible battle in my life, by pulling the hidden door wide open and showing everyone what was inside. Sarah Morgan's office looked like it had been built to intimidate the unprepared. Dark wood shelves lined with legal volumes, a desk big enough to stage a Senate hearing, and a view of downtown that made you feel like every decision in here carried weight. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me everything," she said, clicking her pen like she was winding a trigger. I laid it out. Veronica in my house, Kowalski in uniform, the stage tours, the portfolio guy, the footage of her photographing my documents. She didn't blink. She just kept writing. When I finished, she leaned back, hands steepled. "You realize this isn't just trespassing. This is property fraud. If she's done this before, and I'd bet my license she has, we're looking at a pattern of organized theft. I need it stopped," I said. "Yesterday." "We'll stop her," Sarah said, her voice almost casual. "But we're not rushing this. She's not some petty burglar you scare off with a threat. She's a con artist who hides behind bylaws and paper trails. We have to dismantle her while she still thinks she's in control. That meant one thing. I'd have to keep my head down while she dug deep. And that was harder than I expected. The next week, the pressure came in waves. First came the official HOA notice, hand-delivered, of course, summoning me to an emergency disciplinary meeting for disruptive conduct and threatening a board member. I knew exactly who wrote it. Then, the rumors started. Neighbors I'd spoken to for months now crossed the street instead of saying hello. Beth told me she'd overheard whispers that I was unstable and under investigation. On Thursday, a police cruiser idled outside my house for 20 minutes. The officer didn't knock, didn't even get out, just sat there like a sentry or a warning. Every part of me wanted to march down to Veronica's townhouse and throw her whole scheme in her face. But Sarah's words kept me anchored. Don't let her see you coming. So I played the part. I went to work, mowed the lawn, waved at the same neighbors avoiding my eyes. All the while I was cataloging everything. Timestamps, faces, cars. My office whiteboard was filling with a timeline that looked less like neighborhood drama and more like the opening scene of a true crime docuseries. Beth kept feeding me information. Kowalski had been seen at Veronica's place 3 nights in a row. The man from the portfolio? She found his name in a real estate mailing list. Thomas Brand, specializing in luxury property acquisitions. By the following Monday, Sarah called with her first big find. She's been taking emergency maintenance fees from multiple homeowners for repairs that never happened, Sarah said. We can link it to a fake vendor account in her name. I also pulled the HOA bylaws. There's no such thing as emergency caretaker authority. She made it up. The news should have made me feel invincible. Instead, it tightened the knot in my chest. Because if she realized we were onto her, she'd burn the evidence before we could lock it down. That's when Sarah gave me the part of the plan that made me hesitate. I want you to go to the disciplinary meeting, she said. I stared at the phone. You mean the kangaroo court she's setting up to humiliate me? Exactly, Sarah replied. Let her think she's winning. While she's performing for the board, I'll be finalizing the warrant to seize HOA financial records. If we time it right, she'll walk out of that meeting into the arms of someone who actually has authority. The idea made my stomach turn. I'd be walking straight into her arena, her turf, her allies, her narrative. But I also knew Sarah was right. If we want to make the takedown stick, we had to let her feel untouchable until the last possible second. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at Aunt Dolores' journal. The pages open to where she'd once described Veronica as a hurricane in pearls. My hands itched to skip the careful build-up and just expose her now. But hurricanes are chaotic, and chaos is predictable if you watch the pressure drop. By the time Friday came, the neighborhood was buzzing. Half the residents had heard about the meeting. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others to cheer for the spectacle. The community center's beige walls felt closer than usual, the air thick with cheap coffee and tension. Veronica sat at the center of the folding table, navy blazer immaculate, pearls perfectly in place. She didn't even look at me when I walked in, just smirked at the papers in front of her like she was holding my sentence in her hands. And as I sat down across from her, pretending to study the agenda, I felt it, that electric tension before the storm breaks. She thought this was her stage. She didn't know it was the last act. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed like insects, casting a pale wash over the folding tables. Veronica sat in the middle, framed by her loyal board members like a queen flanked by paper soldiers. Her voice carried with practiced ease. Marcus Reed has engaged in behavior unbecoming of a resident of Millbrook Estates, she began, eyes sliding to me for just a fraction of a second. Harassment, threats, disruption of community harmony. Each word was for the audience, not the record. This was theater. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Let her feel safe. Let her believe this is hers. She paraded her evidence, citations stacked like bricks, Kowalski's written statement, vague neighbor complaints that sounded like they'd been rehearsed in a mirror. The board nodded at the right beats. Then she made her mistake. Mr. Reed is attempting to undermine the HOA's ability to manage this community by questioning legitimate authority, she said, leaning forward. Authority granted under emergency caretaker provisions. I almost smiled. She just put the fiction on the record. The chairperson asked if I had a response. I stood, sliding the laptop from my bag. Just a brief one. The first video clip filled the projector screen. Veronica in my dining room, hosting a catered dinner. Laughter, glasses clinking. Her voice, bright and confident. Our luxury properties speak for themselves. The room shifted. Chairs squeaked. Whispers rose. Next clip, my office. Veronica rifling through my papers, pausing to photograph my property deed. Those images, I said, keeping my voice even, were captured by my security system while I was out of the country. I never authorized anyone to enter my home. Her smirk was gone, replaced with the tight-lipped smile of someone trying not to show the cracks. These are taken out of context, she said. Of course, I replied, clicking to the third clip, her walking a man with a portfolio through my hallway. Zoom on the portfolio logo. Elite Estates Management. This is Thomas Brand, I said. Luxury Property Acquisitions. He's not a security expert. He's a buyer. The whispers sharpened into low murmurs. And then, the nail. A recovered audio file from her crashed computer. Her voice, unmistakable. The divorce guy won't know what hit him. By the time he's back, I'll have a buyer ready. You could feel the air shift, that collective intake when a crowd realizes they're not at a meeting anymore. They're at an execution. Veronica, I said, turning from the screen, do you want to tell them how many homes you've protected this way? Or should I keep playing? For a moment, she stared at me like she could will me into silence. Then she glanced at the door. That's when the heavy tread of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Agent Maria Santos stepped in, crisp FBI windbreaker stark against the beige walls. She held a folder in one hand, badge in the other. Veronica Whitfield? The pearls at her neck didn't move, but her throat did. Yes. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit property theft. The sound of the handcuffs was louder than it should have been. A metallic finality. Veronica's voice cracked into something raw. This is a setup. No, Santos cut in, turning her toward the exit. This is a conclusion. The room stayed silent as she was led past the rows of plastic chairs, except for the shuffle of her heels on the linoleum. Even her staunchest allies stared at the table, at the floor, anywhere but her. When the door closed behind them, the silence broke. Not with applause. Not yet. Just the heavy exhale of a community that had been holding its breath for years. I packed my laptop, slow and methodical, the way you do when you know you've just closed a chapter that can't be reopened. As I stepped outside, the night air hit cold and clean, the parking lot lights glinting off the new locks on my car. Beth was waiting by the curb. Told you she'd trip on her own heels, she said, her voice low. She didn't trip, I said. She jumped. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, not all of it, but enough to stand straighter. Enough to know the fight had been worth it. And somewhere, I swear I could hear Aunt Dolores's voice in the wind. Don't just lock the door, Marcus. Change the keys to the whole kingdom. 3 weeks later, the front porch was mine again. No unfamiliar perfume in the air. No strange cars in the driveway. Just the crisp scent of late autumn and the hollow tap of leaves skittering across the steps. The neighborhood looked the same from the outside. Manicured lawns, neat hedges, mailboxes lined up like soldiers. But something under the surface had shifted. People made eye contact again. They waved without hesitation. And when I passed the community center, the blinds weren't drawn tight anymore. Veronica's arrest had cracked something wider than her grip on Millbrook Estates. For years, people have been swallowing small indignities. Fines they didn't deserve, rules that didn't make sense, whispers that kept them cautious. The day the FBI let her out, you could feel the exhale ripple through every cul-de-sac. But the strange thing about getting what you fought for is how quiet it feels afterward. I'd imagined victory would taste like champagne. Instead, it was coffee at my kitchen table, early lights spilling over the wood, the sound of Tyler upstairs getting ready for school. Simple. Steady. Beth came by with banana bread the first weekend after the board elected a new president. a retired teacher named Frank who had the social skills of a friendly Labrador and a talent for transparency. We talked less about Veronica and more about what could be built in her absence. The HOA records, once hidden behind closed-door executive sessions, were now posted online for every resident to see. Every expense, every contract, every vote. No shadows left to hide in. Sarah called one evening just to tell me the restitution payments had started coming in from the seized accounts. Most of the homeowners didn't care about the money. They cared about the proof. The acknowledgement that what they'd endured wasn't imagined, and that someone had finally stood up to it. I hadn't expected what came next. City Council invited me to speak at a hearing about HOA reform. I told them I wasn't a politician, but they didn't care. They wanted someone who'd lived it, who could explain how protecting property values could be twisted into a weapon. Standing at that podium, looking out at a room full of strangers, I thought about the first night I came home early, suitcase by the door, heart pounding at the sound of strangers' shower upstairs. The way the air had felt stolen from my own house. I told them the truth, that the worst part wasn't losing control of my property, but losing the sense of safety in a place meant to be home. That you can replace locks, install cameras, even win in court, but it's harder to unlock your own sense of peace once it's been tampered with. When the hearing ended, an older woman stopped me in the hallway. She'd been quiet during the session, clutching a folder the way you hold something important when you're not sure anyone will believe you. She said, "I thought I was alone in it." "You're not," I told her. And for the first time, I truly believed it. That spring, the backyard finally hosted something other than suspicion. Tyler and I set up long tables for a neighborhood potluck. Kids tore through the grass, chasing a soccer ball. The grill smoked steadily, and music drifted from a speaker propped in the window. It wasn't a celebration of Veronica being gone. It was something better, a celebration of the space she'd left behind, now filled with something honest. As dusk settled, I walked to the edge of the yard, where the oak trees threw long shadows over the fence. I thought of Aunt Dolores's journal, of the line I'd read and reread during the worst of it. When they think they own the place, they've already lost the only thing that matters, the truth. Back then, I'd taken it as advice for how to win. Now, it felt like a description of what had been restored. The air was cooler near the trees. Somewhere behind me, Tyler laughed, the kind of unguarded, teenage laugh that doesn't happen unless you feel safe. I realized that was the real ending. Not the handcuffs, not the court orders, not even the new bylaws. It was this, the sound of life moving on without looking over its shoulder. When I finally went back inside, I locked the door out of habit, not fear. And for the first time since the night I came home early, the house felt exactly like what it was always meant to be. Home.